Story 1. Hello, my name is Trent. What happened to me is a true story. I'm from a cattle and sheep ranch in Montana. I also have 4 saddle horses. The ranch that my cousin and I own is about 4,700 acres comprising of flat crop and hayfields stretching on both sides of the Yellowstone River. The ranch is located 11 miles northeast of the town of Savage. We also rent a ranch that's 38 miles upriver from us. That is where this incident occurred. The leased ranch is huge, comprising of over 13,000 acres. The folks that own it are multimillionaires from Oregon, who only visit it a few times per year. The ranch has very tough terrain and 3 small creeks running through it. On the very northwest corner of it, the land flattens out, and there is an old coral system. There is also a long vacant house nearby in a draw. We had leased this ranch since the mid-2000s and had no trouble until about 5 years ago. It is normal to lose a few cows in the Yellowstone breaks, but we have lost 130 since 2016. We lost 17 cows the year that my horse was killed. Around half of these cattle we were able to locate. The animals that we found were pretty eaten up by coyotes, but a few we found were not. These carcasses looked a lot like the other cattle mutations with skin around the eyes, the ears, and udder completely missing. It was highly unusual to lose this many cattle, as they were at home throughout the winter, and there are no predators in the eastern Montana that could kill a full-grown cow. All of the cattle that went missing were cows, and always between 3 and 5 years old. This event took place at the end of June last year. We had trucked the cattle to the ranch 2 weeks prior, and I was checking on them that day. Usually my cousin or his son ride with me, but they were moving the irrigation pivot that day, so I was all alone. I parked my pickup next to the corrals and unloaded my horse. This was around 9:30 a.m. My horse's name was Ace. He was a very large horse that weighed a whole ton and stood 19 hands tall. He was a quarter Percheron. Ace was not very quick or fast, but he had great endurance and you could ride him all day through the roughest country and he would not tire. It was a pretty usual day until about 1 p.m. when I saw something that just didn't belong. About a mile away, I could see an animal bounding up a hill. My initial reaction was a deer because it was about as big as one, but had the proportions more like a mountain lion. I tried to ride closer to whatever it was, but I could not find it. It was odd, but not that crazy, so I just put the thought into the back of my head. The day continued normally until I returned to my pickup and trailer. As I went to load Ace, I noticed the rear axle on the trailer had just come apart. Keep in mind that I had not used it till earlier that morning, so there was no reason for that to happen. It was getting pretty late. It was around 8, and it took an hour and a half to get back to the house, so I decided to leave Ace and the trailer there and take the pickup home. The coral fence was all right, but the gate latch had rusted shut to where you could not close it. I had a roll of barbed wire in the pickup, so I used it to secure the gate after I put Ace into it. As I drove home, I noticed a few large lights in the complete opposite direction from the corals. They resembled a combine's lights, even though they were further apart and brighter. Also, there would be no reason for a combine to be up here. I arrived home about 10:30, without having any trouble. The next morning, my cousin, his son, and I all rode up together to fix the axle and get Ace back. When we finally got to the corals, we saw that Ace wasn't there. The wire holding the gate shut had not been meddled with, so there was no logical way that he could have escaped. The coral had not been used in decades, so there was grass growing inside. But that day the grass was all turned up and you could see where Ace had ran around for a while. This was quite unusual as Ace was always a calm and quiet horse. We looked for him the whole day and could not find him, but we were severely limited because we were on foot. The next day, me and my cousin's son returned with a fixed trailer and 2 horses to continue the search for Ace. I also brought my dog Daisy. We split up to cover more ground, and every 2 hours we would meet up. Around 3 in the afternoon, while I was riding around the rim of a steep wooded draw, Daisy suddenly scurried down into the draw. I tied the horse I was riding, Penny, to an old cedar tree and followed Daisy down. The sides of this draw were incredibly steep, and I was struggling to make it down there on foot. For a horse as big as Ace, it would be completely impossible. As I got to the bottom, I could smell something dead, and I immediately knew it was Ace. He had not been touched by predators, but was heavily mutilated. As I looked around, I could see the skeletons of at least 3 cows, and it was obvious that this was some type of dumping ground for whatever did this. I was completely dumbfounded on what had happened. There was no way Ace could have gotten there by himself, so he must have been carefully placed there. I'd also like to mention that where he was a whole 2 miles away from the corrals. Nothing was adding up. Besides, I had just lost my favourite horse. I sadly returned to the spot where me and my cousin's son were going to meet, and we both rode back to the pickup. After talking to my cousin, we decided not to renew our lease. Our current lease will expire in 2022. My cousin's son spends a lot of time on the internet and thought that it sounded very similar to what happened at Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. For the past months, I have been studying what happened, but have been unable to come up with a definitive answer. I posted this on Reddit in the hopes that someone might make sense of it. Feel free to post this on other platforms so more people can see it, and hopefully they will make sense of it. Next spring, when we bring the cows back to the leased ranch, I will take pictures and post them on Reddit. Story 2. This story was told to me by my brother. It occurred during the early 2000s. Smartphones had not been invented yet, only flip phones with sketchy cellular service. My brother was an electrician, a journeyman. He was employed in a small border town called Gallup, New Mexico. Gallup is situated on the cusp of the Navajo Nation Reservation and the area called the Checkerboard Area. Due to the fact that there are designated plots of land that are considered parts of the reservation, and the next plot of land is not, like a checkerboard. There is a large population of multiple tribes in the area such as Navajo, Pueblo, Zuni, etc. One night, my brother and one of his co-workers were the only 2 employees on call, in case of emergencies. A power line goes down or something catastrophic happens like that in the middle of nowhere, outside of Gallup towards the Continental Divide. He received a call in the early morning hours shortly after 1 a.m. The co-worker had recently become the father of a newborn, but desperately needed the hours. My brother calls him and they agree to meet up at the company stockyard. My brother waits about an hour or so. His co-worker hasn't shown. It is strict company protocol to never go on jobs alone, always in pairs or more, due to the hazardous nature of high-voltage lines and electricity in general. My brother's co-worker calls him and tells him that something is wrong with the newborn and he needs to take his wife to the ER, and he'll meet up with him on site. Also another injunction. They are strictly instructed to show up to the job site in the company vehicles, which are equipped with tools required for the job and all that. My brother understands and doesn't want his co-worker to be docked pay or written up for violating company policy. Against his better judgment, he heads out alone. The job site is quite literally in the middle of nowhere, the power line spanning across the vast desert with red mesas in the far distance, in the daylight at least. At nighttime, it is pitch black in the New Mexican desert. Only dirt roads and no houses or streetlights for miles. No one could be seen along the entire horizon. He waits as long as he cares to wait for his co-worker. He figures he'll assess the damage on his own, and by the time his co-worker shows up, he'll have a solution. He suits up and begins crawling the tall wooden pole. The company truck is parked facing towards the pole. The high beams illuminated the base and subsequent foreground. He reaches the top of the pole. Some time passes as he's trying to calibrate the issue or solve the problem of the power outage. Something on the ground below him catches the corner of his peripheral. He looks down in disbelief and shock as his mind tries to make sense of what he is seeing. He described the motions of the Skinwalker and said it was moving as if it was confused as to what was going on or where the driver of the truck was. From his vantage point, he could determine that the Skinwalker was male, was painted with black paint and white clay. Then, on the horizon, he could see headlights. His co-worker was en route. The Skinwalker also noticed this, not figuring out that my brother was up on the power line pole. As his partner approached closer, the Skinwalker runs off into the dark on all fours. The rest of the trouble call was uneventful in regards to the Skinwalker. Story 3. The encounter that led me to want to know more about Skinwalkers. Before I begin my story, I'd like to give some background info on why I'm writing this in the first place. I personally do not believe in skinwalkers or any sort of cryptid. However, the subject fascinates the living hell out of me. The other day, on the Skinwalker subreddit, I saw responses to a question that said, "Why do you believe in skinwalkers with my beliefs?" and gave an extremely brief overview of what led me to learn about skinwalkers. This seemed to attract some attention or curiosity, so I figured that I might as well write about it since I have nothing else to do while quarantining myself. This story takes place in a very small town called Elbert, Colorado, that's very far out in the middle of nowhere. Like a grocery trip took a 45-minute drive just to get to the store. I moved out there in the summer of 2013 when I was about 11. My family lived on an 8-acre piece of property on a fairly thick pine forest, with a house just outside the very edge of it. The driveway to the house was a super crappy, super long dirt road that led out to the main street that had to be a little less than an eighth of a mile away from the house. To this day, I think that the place was the most peaceful place I have ever gone to. The only sounds that could be heard were those of nature and our chickens, as we could not hear the rare car that would pass by. The nights there were the best part of the place, though. Because of the lack of the city lights, I was able to see every detail of the night sky down to the dimmest star. Because of the darkness, however, you weren't able to see a single thing below the horizon of the night sky. Along with that, there were several packs of coyotes that lived out there, and every night they'd all be howling at each other. With enough of them, the noise would almost sound like water. The only thing that really sucked about the property, however, was the walk we had to make to take the trash out. The garbage company would only accept cans that were brought out to the main road. We'd normally take the trash out before it got dark, but occasionally I'd forget and would have to do it at dark, which I normally didn't mind. The trip would normally be a super peaceful walk out, and we had headlamps at the ready so we could actually see where we were going in the dark. Well, the summer before I moved out, there was a night where I forgot to take out the trash during the day, and the batteries on the headlamps were dead. This meant I had to try to navigate my way down our driveway almost completely blind. I went outside and stood next to the trash cans for a minute or two staring into the darkness in order to hopefully adjust my eyes. Staring into the darkness, though, I felt like something was off. The normal coyote sound was gone, and for some reason my eyes would just not adjust to the dark. I kept staring into the abyss looking for any signs that my eyes might be adjusting, but no luck. Then, this terrible feeling tore its way into my chest. The best way I can describe it is as if the darkness, this abyss that I was staring into, was staring back at, no, into me. I was frozen with fear. I knew that I was alone out there, but something told me that if I were to walk into the darkness, I would not be returning. I continued staring, almost unable to look away from the darkness for a long time before my mum came out to check on me. Her opening the door seemed to break me out of my trance, and I ran to her and started crying. She looked at me confused and noticed that I still hadn't taken the trash out. After telling her about what I had felt, she laughed a little and gave me some encouraging words to tell me that if there was anything out there, our dogs would have surely noticed by now. She then told me to come back in 10 minutes for ice cream. I turned back around and walked back to our trash cans, shaking. I had never been so scared in my life. And what of? Nothing? I chuckled to myself, realizing the absurdity of it. When I took my eyes back off the ground, the chuckle turned back into a cry. I realized that I wasn't scared of nothing. I was terrified that there was something out there that I could not see, waiting for me to leave the light of the house lamp to attack. Then, the coyotes started, and my eyes started adjusting. Whatever might have been out there was gone, along with all my fear. The tears stopped along with most of the fear, and I was able to start dragging the trash cans down. The walk was somewhat scary, though I was able to let the sound of the coyotes distract me. By the time I got back up to my house, I felt safe again, but I could not stop thinking about that abyss. While I lived at that house, that was probably my scariest encounter. There were other scary encounters while I was there, but the only one that could even slightly relate to the other takes place at my friend's house. For the sake of privacy, I'll simply refer to this friend as D. They had a property that was about 10 minutes from mine, and we shared the same forest. with the only separation being a road in between us. We had been hanging out for a while that day playing a bunch of video games when I had the idea to go out in the dark and explore his property. He agreed, so we waited until night fell. After a few more hours of video games and dinner, it finally seemed dark enough to go out, so we did. We were wandering his 7-acre property, being pretty stupid, loud, and making half-assed attempts to try to get each other a little scared. After some time of this, we eventually wandered into a clearing, and I guess the attempt settled in for both of us. At the same time, we looked around concerned. There was something off, and it felt like we were being watched. Trying to keep a good mood and maybe trying to keep my mind off whatever was making us feel this way, I suggested we make another scary video to scare Dee's little brother. Dee laughed and agreed and pulled out his phone and started recording. We were acting like we kept seeing things in the woods. I would throw a stick when the camera was facing away, make weird grunting noises and such in order to make the video creepy. We both were having a good time. However, deep down, I felt like something was very off, and I think he did too. Then, out of nowhere, a twig snapped behind us. I automatically assumed that Dee had thrown something, but when I looked at him to confirm, he was looking at me to see if I had thrown it. Before this moment, I was trying very hard to make my voice sound as scared as possible for the video. However, as soon as I heard this, I didn't need to try anymore. We stared in the direction that the twig snap came from for a second, hoping to make out something, but to no avail. Once again, my eyes would not adjust to the darkness, except this time, instead of physically standing in the light, I was inside of the darkness. Partially for the video and partially for my sanity, I whispered, "Run!" Dee nodded slightly, his face illuminated by his phone, and then we started sprinting in the direction of his house. I don't think I had run so hard in my life beforehand, but there was this feeling in my gut telling me that we weren't fast enough, that we needed to hide. Dee must have felt the same thing. He took the lead and led us to a nearby cat shed. A motion sensor light flickered on as we passed by, and we got in the shed as quickly as we could. After getting the door shut, Dee turned on his light, revealing the inside of the shed. At the time, it seemed to me like the cats were hiding from something. However, looking back on it, they were probably just sleeping in their beds in the corner of the shed. This freaked me out even more. Dee started climbing the wall of the shed and led us to an almost shelf-like structure that had a window that we could look out of. Dee sat on one side of the window, and I sat on the other, so that we were facing each other, and we could see both angles from the window. Eventually, with the light on outside and the added comfort of the roof over our head, we started to calm down and focus on the video again. As we were talking about what might have been out there, the motion sensor light turned off, dropping the outside back into the dark. We went quiet, as the uneasy feeling washed over us again. To me, it didn't feel like we were being watched anymore, more like we were being looked for. We stared intently out the window looking for signs of anything, when I thought I started hearing footsteps. Having a wall between us and the steps muffled them, so I couldn't be sure what I was hearing. I asked Dee about them, and he said he heard them. However, I'm pretty sure he was saying that for the video. We went quiet again, listening. Then I heard the footsteps get slightly louder. One of the cats started rubbing up against us, which distracted us and caused us to turn around and start petting him. Because who wouldn't pet a cat? As we were petting him, the motion sensor light flickered on. I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms to my face as we slowly turned around. We looked out the window and saw nothing. Dee told me that we should get inside, and I agreed with him. We carried the cat back down to its bed and got ready to make the 50-yard sprint directly to his house. He opened the door and I shut it, and then we were in the cold, dark woods running as hard as we could from whatever turned on that light. After what felt like forever of sprinting, we finally got to Dee's front door and we rushed inside. We slammed his sliding glass door and didn't sleep until we saw the sun rising the next morning. Though these encounters were terrifying at the time, a lot of it can easily be explained by me just freaking myself out. There was nothing out there during the trash can story, and at Dee's house. We found raccoon prints the next morning outside of the cat shed. None of these things ever stopped me from loving the woods, and within a week I was certain I was just making things up myself. I continued loving the woods we lived in for the next year that we lived there, but eventually my family and I ended up moving out. My dad got a job offer in Minnesota that would improve our financial situation and not force my dad to a 2-hour commute every day. Minnesota, however, proved to be the worst place that I've lived in, at least for the first year or two. After living in such a small town and adapting to my friends in Albert so much, I found it very hard to make any friends in Minnesota. I was constantly thinking about my friends and the girlfriend I had left in Albert, and refused to work to make friends, and the people at my new school didn't seem to particularly like me. I would still talk to my Albert friends almost every night playing video games and stuff with them, which is almost the only thing that seemed to make me any sort of happy while I was there. With my mental health in the garbage and my lack of friends, my parents agreed to let me go to Albert during the summer to visit my friends. After the first visit, my mental health was way better, and I started to open up to other people in the new school as well. So my parents agreed to make the Albert trips annual, as long as I planned them. Yeah, I have the coolest parents ever, of all time. So every year since then, I've been visiting my friends in Albert. The most recent visit is the reason I'm writing this. Every year I would hang out with my friends who I'll call K, T, and D. Same D from the other story. Because of stupid teenage drama, they would almost never hang out together. One of my favourite things to do with them was, ironically, go squatching. Squatching is looking for Bigfoot, typically making their hypothetical calls and using other communication methods in the hopes to find one. This was simply an excuse to go yell in the forest at night for me. This most recent visit, I finally had managed to get K, T, and D to all hang out together. We had planned on making a short film that was based on these stupid videos that T and I used to make. We ended up trying to film it, but ended up with just one scene before we decided to just play video games instead. Well, one day, after dinner, the group came up with an idea to make a squatching video. K, T, and I filmed one last year, so we figured we'd do another one this year and try to make this an annual thing. We took K's little brother out with us to film for us, and we started recording our video. The sun was still up, so we had no intention of it being any sort of scary, just a funny, ironic video. We wandered around for an hour or so making crappy Australian accents and shouting for Bigfoot, when Kay had the idea that we could split up and look for Sasquatch. So we did. We each went off on our own into these woods with the cameramen following me, each making the occasional Sasquatch call and tree knock. We had some walkie-talkies with us, so we were able to tell each other when we were making a call. After some time, D, T, and I found each other and decided to meet up with Kay in a clearing. We started walking, and Kay came in over the radio saying he was about to make a call. We waited, and from the forest came the most terrifying noise I've ever heard somebody make. The best way I could describe it was that it was like a dying elephant that had a smoking problem. Then he came over the radio. "Was that you guys?" he asked. We assumed he was joking around for the video, so we joked back. "No, mate, we've pissed the Squatch off. We need to get out of here. Meet us back at your house." We ran out of the forest quickly. When we met up with Kay, he apparently had cut himself on some barbed wire. That, plus the terrifying scream we heard him make earlier, seemed to put us off hunting Sasquatch, so we decided to stop for the time being. We went inside and played Halo for hours, messing with each other and doing other stupid stuff, not mentioning what happened while squatching the rest of the night. When night had more than passed and it was around midnight, we decided to go back outside and continue squatching, this time without a camera and with a bunch of flashlights. We decided to go pretty deep into the forest before making calls, so as not to wake Kay's family and neighbours up. Eventually, we got to the point where we had split up from earlier and had decided what to do. After talking about it some, we decided to see where Kay had run off to. Then, I made the first squatch call for the night. After the call, the woods went completely silent. In my previous story, I talked about the abyss watching me. This was almost the same, except it felt as if the forest were listening to us. We laughed about it and poked fun at each other, trying to creep one another out, and started walking. Kay led us pretty deep into his woods, and eventually stopped in a small opening, showing us that this is where he had radioed us from before the call. The thing is, Kay didn't refer to the call as his. He referred to it as one of ours. This didn't register at the moment, but thinking back on it definitely gives me the creeps. After a bit more joking around, Kay decided to take us to the boundary of his property where he had cut himself. We walked in a straight line toward the fence. Then I think Kay figured we'd followed the fence to where he cut himself. As we walked deeper into the forest, though, our jokes started to die down. The silence, darkness, and this feeling started to get to us. We were starting to suspect that we were being watched. We arrived at the fence and started walking along it when Kay stopped, confused. I looked to where his flashlight was pointing, and there was the fence. However, the fence was almost dented, if that makes any sense. It looked like something had come through and simply stopped on the fence with enough weight that the fence couldn't bring itself to its natural position. I shined my flashlight into the other property and asked Kay about it. I can't remember exactly what he told me, but I think I remember him saying it was a large piece of property owned by Native Americans and had once been sacred or something like that. That was probably terribly wrong, so take that with a grain of salt. Our group looked at each other. "Let's go over it," I remember myself saying. "Worst case scenario, we find whoever's property it is, and we can tell them about the broken gate." This was obviously not the worst case scenario, especially out in the country like this, but we continued anyway. After going through some more pretty heavy woods, we found a clearing. And then we found something awful. The hair on the back of our necks stood up at once, and we started hearing slight twig snaps in every which direction. This was a massive change from the previously quiet forest that we had just been walking through. We quickly shined our lights every which way, looking for anything that could be causing the fear, when Dee's light stopped on something. "Guys, do you see that?" We all shined our lights on the spot that he was looking at. I couldn't see anything at first, and I was about to say no when I made out what looked like the reflection of eyes. We each confirmed one by one, each of us starting to make out the eyes. Then, we did something stupid. We started walking towards it. Maybe this was because there were 4 of us and 1 pair of eyes, or maybe it was how luring they looked. But every step we took, the more they faded out, until we couldn't see them anymore. Then, we felt the hairs on the back of our necks stand up more than ever, as if pointing in the direction of something that did not approve of us being there. We stood back to back, making a square, as we felt the presence circling us. "Guys, let's get out of here," one of the group members said. We all nodded and waited. Then, when the time felt right, we sprinted. We all ran as fast as we could, jumping over the fallen fence through the forest until eventually I saw the house. I heard the others run by me, hidden by the forest, when suddenly I stopped. "Ryan, help!" My heart sank. I had just heard the other 3 run by me, yet this was the perfect voice of Kay calling for my help. I shoved the thought that this could be Kay out of my head. After all, I had just heard all 3 of my friends run by me. I began sprinting again, hoping to catch up with Kay. After sprinting for a minute or 2, I caught up with them, beginning to slow down, almost at the house. I caught up with Kay and was about to try to talk to him when both of us flinched backward, almost falling. Just to the right of us, there was a crashing thud of something that had just hit the ground. We quickly recovered and sprinted in toward the door, urging the others on. When we finally got back to Kay's house, we slammed the door behind us and had to just rest, panting. When we all seemed to calm down, Kay asked what the hell had happened out there. We all went around and shared what we saw. Dee said he saw the reflection of eyes and no more than what was just in the clearing. Kay said he saw the reflection of eyes in the clearing and heard the 2 thuds that freaked us both out. T said he might have seen the eyes in the clearing and some yellow-red ones as we were closing the door. I stated what I saw, but decided to leave out the voice since I wasn't, and still am not, sure I heard what I heard. We sat down and almost immediately started searching up cryptoids and looking for other stories like ours. Within half an hour, our primary theories were of a goat man, a Jersey devil, and possibly a Wendigo. Almost in response to our theories, we heard 2 ever so quiet footsteps on the roof. Eventually, we got to sleep, but after that, We never spoke a word of it again. Maybe a year or so later, I was trying to creep myself out when I found stories about Wendigos. These stories sounded familiar to my experience, but didn't seem to be quite right. Well, that led into a rabbit hole, and eventually I learned about Skinwalkers. Since then, I've loved hearing stories about them, and I'm very fascinated with what they are and how they hunt. I've stopped believing recently, however, after rethinking my tale for like the 100th time. I'm 90% sure that what we heard and saw was just a horse that we got onto the bad side of, which is oddly common, I guess. What really spooks me out, however, is when I let the 10% wander, and I think that it might have been something paranormal. Either way, I don't understand how Kay still lives on that property. I'll be visiting him this summer, so I'll see them again. But hopefully, we won't encounter whatever we might have last time. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. If you enjoyed it, please show your appreciation by clicking on the like button and subscribing to my channel.